50, The Defense of the United States. The final program examines the American strategy of a limited nuclear war in Europe. And in a special interview, a top Kremlin advisor gives David Dimbleby the Russian viewpoint. Finally, at 11:40, International Ice Skating from Richmond features a special appearance by John Carey, completing the lineup of programs for Thursday evening on BBC One.
So now, a weekly look at some of the latest inventions which may help to shape our future.
Remember those spectacular displays at the Moscow Olympics? Each person holding up an appropriate coloured card and producing a brilliant effect like that? Well, at next year's Commonwealth Games in Brisbane, they're going to try for the same effect, using plastic building blocks like this. Put 50,000 of these together and you get a giant display screen based on exactly the same principle. We've got a smaller version in the studio tonight. There it goes. Each block is tumbled to the chosen colour until, one by one, the complete picture is built up. But what Marilyn Monroe has to do with the Commonwealth Games is beyond me. Anyway, the blocks simply hang there on a metal bar until they're turned by a mobile arm which sweeps up or down behind the display. Well, in fact, it's all done by magnetism. At the edges of each block are tiny strips of metal, and the mobile arm doesn't touch them, it attracts them, just like this. Rather more effectively than that, I think. Now, behind that screen, there's not a little man holding a toy magnet. They work automatically. Built into that moving arm are any amount of tiny electromagnets, each of them corresponding to the individual blocks as the bar sweeps up or down. The overall effect is pretty impressive, as shown by this stirring vision of wonderful London.
At a time when many of us are considering metering our water consumption for the first time, we have tonight a development in water meters which could simplify greatly the reading of meters of all kinds. In fact, it would eliminate the need for the meter reader to gain access to the property and to have to find the meter, whatever sort it was. It's a system which simply connects each meter, wherever it happens to be, to a remote pickup point on the outside wall of the house or flat. Now, here are 6 points connected to 6 meters on the other side of the studio. Each one has got its own account number. Each one represents a different household's water consumption. Now, each total is, of course, displayed on the meter as digits, but it's also recorded in each meter's built-in electronic circuitry. So the meter reader simply connects this device to the remote pickup point. That signal indicates that the meter has dumped both its identity and its running total, and that one that it's been recorded on the system here. Let's try one more. Information dumped, reading recorded. Right, back to base. And we'll be able to see that in this little box is a conventional cassette of tape on which the readings are taken. That is put into a reader unit, which is rewound, and we should be able to see whether the information we've got tallies with the meters on the other side of the studio. Right, here's meter number 1, and its identity is 721304, so we've chosen the one in the middle. The digits on the bottom indicate the amount of water consumed, which the system says is 3252 litres. Check. Right, on we go to the second one we took, which is identity 206438. Bottom right for that one. My system says 6064. What does it say on the meter itself? Again, a check. So, it works with water. The bills can, of course, now be prepared by computer. But the beauty of the system is that those same pickup points at that same meter reading could disclose both gas and electricity consumption as well as water, making a dramatic simplification of the whole meter reading process possible. Of course, whether the three authorities involved will ever get close enough together for this to happen remains another question.
Any operation involves some degree of risk, and when it's on the brain, even the slightest error can cause permanent damage.
Okay, sister, scope coming in.
So to reduce the dangers, neurosurgeons now use binocular microscopes, so they can see exactly what they're doing. The precision of microsurgery is vitally important, but there's a price to pay for it: time. Brain operations can take 30 hours, a physical ordeal for the staff, and even worse for the patient, because the longer he's on the operating table, the less his chance of survival.
Move.
Here at the Derby Royal Infirmary, the problem was investigated by a team of design engineers. And they realised that constantly adjusting the locks on the weighted microscope stand wasted a vast amount of time. In fact, almost half the operation. That can mean 15 out of 30 hours. They had to find another way of doing things. And the inspiration came from this, an angle poised lamp. It's classic design. A heavy base, which keeps out of the way, and then a lamp, which can be manipulated to exactly where you want it. And that's done without any need for complicated locking systems or weights. In fact, it's all done using springs. So here's the answer to the problem: the angle poised microscope stand. The vital spring's in here, and that balances the weight at this end. At the moment, the weight's made up by a microscope in the middle, a video camera here, and an ordinary camera at this side. But if it isn't necessary to use cameras, you can adjust for the weight difference quite simply by releasing the tension in the spring. Now watch. As you can see, the head's so light, it moves incredibly easily. But although the system supports itself like an angle poised lamp, for safety, it does need a locking system, and one that's quick to operate. And for that, the designers borrowed an idea used in transport: air brakes. This model shows how they work. Two friction pads are constantly pressed together, using a spring again, which is inside here. Now they can only be forced apart, and the brakes released, when a blast of compressed air pushes them apart. Brake pads like those are found on the stand here, here, and just here. And because they've been reconnected, the head is quite rigid. And it'll stay like that until the surgeon needs to move it. Then it's a very easy matter. He just has to press this trigger. There's the compressed air, and it'll move around. When he wants to make it rigid again, it's finger off the button, the air again, and now you can't move that head. And it's just as easy with the left hand. But why should that be so important? Well, strangely enough, they found that half of all neurosurgeons are left-handed. But of course, for most of the time, they want to use both hands for the surgery. So they had to find another way of moving this head. Just watch. Biting on the trigger makes small adjustments without wasting any time. So the finger trigger is only needed for the bigger movements. But what does it mean to the surgeon, Mr. John Firth?
Well, I think it's great. I mean, it's the answer for me. Instead of walking in the sands, as it were, sliding backwards the whole time, one can keep working right the way through. But of course, the most important thing is the patient. And it's the patients that count, and it's the patient that it's all about. And here we have something which cuts down our time, makes each operation not only that much better, but that much safer, and it extends the benefits of these operations to many more people. So that's the real benefit that I see. And that's the most important benefit of all.
Okay, we're closing now. Right.
Space shuttle, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
April this year, and a moment of triumph for the space shuttle. But then came these pictures from space, which showed that some of its protective tiles had been torn off. A couple of days later, of course, Columbia landed safely. But the tile problem, which has dogged the project from the start, won't go away. Columbia has once again become the space shuffle, its second flight twice delayed. First, a forklift truck bumped into it, breaking off some of the tiles, and then a spill of nitrogen tetroxide propellant from these motors in the nose cone managed to dislodge another 338 of them. So the second launch, which was to have been yesterday, can't happen now until sometime in November at the earliest. Now, the job of these ceramic tiles is to protect the shuttle from the searing heat of re-entry. But why should it be such a problem to keep them fixed firmly in place? Well, they're very brittle, they're very fragile, and they can't be stuck directly onto the metal fuselage. The fuselage flexes and vibrates in flight, and it would crack them. So a layer of felt is first stuck to the metal to absorb the fuselage movement, and then the tile is fixed to that. The glue itself has to be flexible too. It's a bit like bathroom caulk. And with a total of 31,000 tiles, well, perhaps it's not surprising they're a headache. And while NASA insists that the system works, well, it did last time, 1,300 of these tiles were still so badly damaged by the experience, they had to replace them, which hardly makes it the completely reusable spacecraft it's supposed to be. And that's why NASA has quietly come up with an alternative. We can now reveal that the flying brickyard may soon become the flying continental quilt. This is the new material with which NASA is planning to replace many of the tiles. It's still silica fibre, but processed differently, so that it's completely flexible. It can be used in much larger pieces, and it's going to be flight tested next time Columbia blasts off. In fact, a strip of it has already been fitted to the orbiter back here, in the space between the elevon and the wing. And by the time the third shuttle orbiter, Discovery, is delivered to the Cape, all of these white tiles will have been replaced by the new material. Now that, of course, is just the top half, but it isn't the full story. We've established that Rockwell, the major contractors for the orbiter, have been considering a metal protective system that could do away with ceramic tiles, not to say quilts, anywhere on the plane. This is a titanium tile built for NASA. Now, titanium and the even more heat-resistant alloy of nickel and titanium could cope with most of the temperatures that the shuttle would have to face. And by building them up into a sandwich like this, with air layers in between, you can ensure that very little heat is transferred through the tile to the aluminium body of the orbiter. Well, the advantages are tremendous. They're much tougher and they're less brittle. And they clip on too, which means no more troublesome glue. Well, this tile has actually been subjected to lightning strike tests, and the spark which produced this crater would certainly have dislodged several ceramic tiles. Certainly the team that's produced these are confident that their greater reliability would mean they'd pay for themselves within a few flights. They might be more expensive, but at least you could use them again.
These are leeches. Ugh. Hardly the kind of animal I like to get to know well. But until about 80 years ago, anyone visiting the doctor was very familiar with these gruesome creatures, because bloodletting was an accepted treatment for almost all illnesses, from constipation to convulsions. I think I'll put them back in their leech pot. One's escaped. Today, we think of bloodletting as primitive nonsense, but we may have to reconsider that view, because at a conference being held in London at the moment, doctors are pressing for the reintroduction of bloodletting for certain diseases. So why this change of mind? Well, the ideas come from studying how the blood flows in our bodies. It's rather like the plumbing system at home. Hot water pipes become partially blocked like this because of hard water. And in the disease arteriosclerosis, arteries also become partially blocked. And in both cases, the result's the same. Liquid has a very hard time getting through. Doctors have been searching for a cure for arteriosclerosis for many years because it's a common and serious medical problem which can cause heart attacks and strokes. One new approach brings us back to bloodletting. Blood's made up of these two parts, plasma at the top here and the red blood cells which carry oxygen. And normally they're mixed up together like that. Now, if you lose blood after an accident, say, or through bloodletting, the body builds up the volume in a matter of hours, but not with red blood cells. they take too long to make. So practically all the topping up is done with this, plasma. And it has the effect of diluting the blood, which is the crucial factor in the return of bloodletting. Because now, just compare the flow of diluted and ordinary blood in this test system over here. First of all, the ordinary blood in this reservoir, and then the diluted blood. Now, the pipes leading to flow meters represent the thickened arteries. And already you can see the normal blood is just dripping through, while the diluted blood, there's a very good flow. The practice of bringing poor circulation up to speed by bloodletting is spreading, and doctors claim that the faster flow more than makes up for the lower percentage of red blood cells. So, will this mean a massive leech revival? No, you can relax. Today, they do it this way. They use sterilised syringes like this.
Ants are a plain nuisance here in Britain, but in hotter countries they're a menace not just because they sting you, but because they devastate the food crops. When one of these ants finds food it likes, it uses its sting to lay a microscopic chemical trail back to the nest deep underground. Then other ants follow that trail back to the food, which they then finish off. Very clever, but unfortunately for the ants, the trailblazers here at Keele University are cleverer still. They've managed to crack the code of that faint chemical trail and make a copy which can lead the ants astray, to poisonous food perhaps. Believe me, it wasn't easy.
First, they had to anaesthetise an ant and gently tug out its sting with the fragile venom sac still attached. Next, they made a hair-thin glass tube to puncture the tiny sac and suck out that venomous cocktail of liquid poisons and vapours, part of which, presumably, the ant uses for laying its trail. Got it! A tiny sample, but this instrument might tell them which of the scores of its ingredients the ants follow. They know the trail substance must be a vapour, or the ant's antennae wouldn't pick it up. In goes the sample, the instrument heats it, and one by one separates off the vapours from the ant's venom in order of their molecular size. It's a highly sensitive method of detection, and the amount of each vapour is automatically plotted out on the graph. And after all that painstaking effort, nothing at all showed up on the graph. Never mind, the scientists half suspected that might happen because the quantities are so very, very small. So they tried to collect the vapours boiled off by the instrument by bubbling them all together through a solvent, cooled in a special freezer. It didn't look too promising. There were no bubbles at all. Nothing to see but solvent. It was here the scientists did something extraordinary. They took that empty phial and tried its invisible contents on the ants. They drew a circle with their load of nothing, and look what happened. You couldn't see it, you couldn't detect it, but the ants followed it blindly.
But the scientists still didn't know which molecules in the invisible mixture the ants were responding to.
So back to the chromatograph to separate the ingredients of the invisible sample. The idea was to try each fraction of nothing on the ants. Feeling rather like the emperor with his new clothes, they drew rough circles with each invisible fraction. The ants followed only one of them. They put just that one sample back into the analyzer, turned up the sensitivity to the top notch, and once again sat back to wait for something to reveal itself. And there, at last, was a tiny bump. The height of the bump showed that the magic ingredient the ants followed was present in quantities less than 5,000 millionths of a gram in each poison sac. The extracts from 50 ants would be necessary for the next step, analysis on the university's mass spectrometer. This instrument fires electrons at the individual molecules of the trail substance and shatters them. The pattern in which the fragments land acts as a fingerprint by which the substance can be identified. And here was the pattern for the ants' trail. Libraries of spectrometer patterns have been collected over the years from every conceivable branch of chemical analysis. Had this pattern ever been found before? Yes, it had. 2,5-dimethyl-3-ethyl-pyrazine. It had turned up before in the flavour of coffee. Having found out what it was comparatively easy to make it artificially. Now, a month or so later, the scientists can make the ants follow an artificial trail, at least in the laboratory. It works well on paper, and that's a remarkable success for science, but grass and soil may be a different matter. So will the material ever be able to achieve its purpose and lead the ants to their doom out in the field? The practical application of this clever detective story could prove as difficult as the detection itself. But when they solve that one, we'll have the future of the ant in the palm of our hand.
Of course, chemicals inspire more than just ants. Take our next machine, for instance. It's the latest in Postman, designed to move automatically around an office, collecting the post, distributing memos and the like. And it follows not a cable buried in the floor, but its own chemical trail, which is able to guide it and even program it to stop for a second or two. A little ultraviolet light will help reveal what is going on. Down here, in front of the truck, we should be able to see fluorescence. There is a chemical painted on the floor of the studio which is fluorescent. The truck picks up that glow and uses it to guide its wheels and control its motor. And here, alongside the guide track, is a signal which should instruct the truck when it gets there to stop for 5 seconds. Well, let's see if the vehicle is as obedient as it ought to be. Off it goes. And when it gets to that spot on the corner, it should pause for 5 seconds. 2, 3, make the pickup, 5, and away. But the real beauty of the system comes should the office layout have to be changed. Let me park the obedient servant there, come across here and show you something else. It's perfectly possible, without digging up the floor or altering the cables, to simply obliterate the fluorescent track. A neutralizer is applied to our original route so that the system can't see that, and a new route, which we've, to save time, already applied to the floor, is opened up by linking in a little piece of fluorescent chemical. Now, these chemicals can be applied to carpets, to tiles, to cement, to lino, so there should be no office surface on which this system will not operate. Let's get the ultraviolet light out of the way, go back to the truck and see if it will divert from its original route onto our new one at this point, which of course is invisible now that the ultraviolet light is gone. Over the junction, one final safety point. Proximity detectors pick up the presence of me and prevent the vehicle crashing into me, though it will nudge up to see whether I'm going to move out of the way or whether it is simply going to have to wait. Right, as well as carrying mail, this system is quite capable of carrying mails. In fact, in the not-too-distant future, a much larger version of this will be available, which will carry spare parts around production areas and warehouses. Who knows? They might one day come up with a system to carry presenters around television studios. Well, we'll be back next week. Until then, from all of us in the Tomorrow's World studio, very good night to you.
Over now to a studio in Broadcasting House.